Hello students, welcome to the lecture on Liberalization, Privatization and Globalization, LPG. And after this lecture, we will be able to learn the following objectives. Explain the concept of liberalization, understand the advantages and disadvantages of liberalization, define the meaning of privatization, discuss the advantages and disadvantages of privatization, describe the term globalization. Understand advantages and disadvantages of globalization. Let's start with the concept of liberalization, privatization and globalization, LPG. Globalization is a term that denotes this process of cross-fertilization. It is a widening, deepening and speeding up of worldwide interconnectedness in all aspects of contemporary social life, a breakdown of borders between countries, governments, economies, communities and markets. Globalization has economic, political, social, environmental and cultural dimensions. It is the intensification of cross-national economies, political, cultural, social and technological interactions that lead to the establishment of transnational structures and the integration of political and social processes. More specifically, globalization is increasing integration between markets, both national and regional, for goods, services and capital. It is an integration of economies and societies through cross-country flows of information, ideas, technologies, goods, services, capital, finance and people. Liberalization, more specifically economic liberalization, refers to the relaxing of restrictions and controls in the economy. It is an elimination or reduction of state monopolies in the economic sphere. The central feature of liberalization is to introduce additional competition through reduction in state regulation in the marketplace. The concept of privatization has been pursued as part of economic liberalization and reinforcing public sector efficiency for enlisting private sector participation in the economy. In micro perspective, privatization is the transfer from public to private sector the responsibility, management and ownership of functions or enterprises held by the government sector. Let us now discuss liberalization. Liberalization means freeing the economy from government control. It put an end to all the rules and laws which were aimed at regulating the activities of private sector. Liberalization process is on the slow track. Government is expected to reduce and finally give up its involvement in economic matters and play a major role in providing the required socio-economic infrastructure. The government, however, is reluctant to give up its role of owning and controlling economic activities. At the same time, its inability to spend for providing minimum health and education services. It is eager to spend on higher education without spending enough on primary and secondary education. It has failed in providing a corruption-free administration, an essential precondition for increasing competitiveness. Liberalization is a process of increasing the openness of the domestic economy to the global market. Opening up the domestic market to international competition entails removal of barriers to the free flow of goods and services across borders and the adjustments of domestic industries. These hindrances are caused mainly by market imperfections and institutional and legal barriers. As a consequence of opening up to global commerce, foreign products and services are allowed to enter the domestic market with ease and compete with local industries. The benefits of liberalization is economic performance. An efficient services infrastructure is a precondition for economic success. Development. Its access to world-class services helps exporters and producers in developing countries to capitalize on their competitive strength, whatever the goods and services they are selling. Consumer savings. There is strong evidence in many services, not least telecoms, that liberalization leads to lower prices, better quality and wider choices for consumers. The GATS came into force in 1955 and constitutes the legal framework through which World Trade Organization (WTO) members progressively liberalized trade in services, including health-related services. Within the GATS framework, trade in health services is understood as the provision of specialized and general health personnel, nursing services, hospital services, ambulance services, and physiotherapeutic and paramedical services provided by medical and dental laboratories. The WTO is the only global international organization dealing with the rules of trade between nations. At its heart are the WTO agreements negotiated and signed by the bulk of the world's trading nations and ratified in their parliaments. The goal is to help producers of goods and services, exporters and importers conduct their business. Now moving on to the next topic, we will study the advantages and disadvantages of liberalization. There are various advantages and disadvantages of liberalization. One advantage of liberalism is that trade barriers would no longer be present, leading to cheaper rates on goods. A disadvantage to liberalization is that the free rein on liberty could be abused by many. Advantages. Liberalization can well be considered an investment in the future financial well-being of a nation. It helps the banking industry as a whole by providing increased financial flexibilities of firms, reduced transaction costs, improved allocation efficiency, attraction of new capital to financial intermediaries, the need of liberalization in international business. These considerations point to the need to liberalize trade further. Although protection has declined substantially over the past 3 decades, it remains significant in both industrial and developing countries, particularly in areas such as agriculture, products or labor-intensive manufacturers and services, example construction, where developing countries have comparative advantage. Industrial countries maintain high protection in agriculture through an array of very high tariffs, including tariff peaks, tariffs above 15%, tariff escalation, tariffs that increase with the level of processing, and restrictive tariff quotas, limits on the account that can be imported at a lower tariff rate. Average tariff production in agriculture is about 9 times higher than in manufacturing. Many developing countries themselves have high tariffs. On average, the tariffs on the industrial products they import are 3 to 4 times as high as those of industrial countries, and they exhibit the same characteristics of tariff peaks and escalation. Tariffs on agriculture are even higher, 18%, than those on industrial products. For a variety of reasons, preferential access schemes for poorer countries have not proven very effective at increasing market access for these countries. Such schemes often exclude or they provide less generous benefits for the highly protected products of most interest to exporters in the poorest countries. They are often complex, non-transparent and subject to various exemptions and conditions, including non-economic ones that limit benefits or terminate them once significant market access is further achieved. Further liberalization by both industrial and developing countries will be needed to realize trade's potential as a driving force for economic growth and development. Greater efforts by industrial countries and the international community more broadly are called for to remove the trade barriers facing developing countries, particularly the poorest countries. Although quotas under the so-called multi-tier agreement are due to be phased out by 2005, a speedier liberalization of textiles and clothing and of agriculture is particularly important. Enhanced market access for the poorest developing countries would provide them with the means to harness trade for development and poverty reduction. Offering the poorest countries duty and quota-free access to world markets would greatly benefit these countries at little cost to the rest of the world. The recent market opening initiatives of the EU and some other countries are important steps in this regard. To be completely effective, such access should be made permanent, extended to all goods and accompanied by simple, transparent rules of origin. This would give the poorest countries the confidence to persist with difficult domestic reforms and ensure effective use of debt relief and aid flows. Let's know the meaning of privatization. The revolution of privatization started in 1980 and spread to many parts of the world. Several countries are privatizing their public sector enterprises. Privatization was meant to improve the performance of public enterprises. Privatization techniques have been tried in countries like Great Britain, China, US, Turkey, Brazil, Mexico, Japan, etc. Privatization in the narrow sense means transfer of ownership or sale of public enterprises. However, privatization has been used in different ways as detailed as liberalization approach. Privatization may be used in the sense of liberalization having fewer controls and regulation by the state in economic activities. This also means slowing of new controls and regulations and also dismantling of the existing controls and regulations. Relative share enlargement approach. Privatization may relate to enlargement of the share of private enterprises in the production of goods and services in the economy. This means that faster economic expansion of goods and services produced by private sector and slowing down of production of goods and services in the public sector. Let us now discuss the advantages and disadvantages of privatization. Advantages: increase in efficiency and profitability. Most government industries and services are inefficient and running in losses. When these will be transferred to private sector, the administration will improve and non-development expenditures will be reduced. The efficiency will increase and will be converted into profitable ventures. Increase in forest investment and export earnings. Privatization will increase foreign investment when foreigners will purchase them. Their production will increase, which will more foreign exchange for Pakistan, and if these enterprises are set up by foreign loans, these loans will be repaid out of the sale proceeds, which will reduce the burden of foreign loans. Disadvantages. Increase in tax evasion. Private sector generally tries to avoid payment of taxes. Thus, privatization of enterprises will result in the decrease of tax income. Concentration of wealth. Privatization of large industrial units and services sectors such as banks and insurance companies will increase concentration of wealth in private hands. It means only rich people will reap the fruits of industrialization, and the society will be divided between the haves and the haves not. Limitation of privatization. It is tempting to believe that private owners, by pursuing their own self-interest, can preserve shared inheritance. The reality, however, is that private corporations operating in unconstrained markets then allocate resources efficiently but cannot preserve them. The latter task requires setting up aside some supplies for future generations, something neither markets nor corporations, when left to their own devices, will do. The reason lies in their operating instructions. This does not mean people inside corporations do not think about protecting nature, raising workers' pay, or giving people something back to the society. Often they do. It does mean there is room for actually doing such things is too narrow to make a difference. Corporate managers, even the most enlightened ones, are trapped in a cold-hearted system. At best, they can be public-spirited as long as they do not harm the bottom line. This gives them some range to operate. For example, if using recycled paper adds minimally to their cost, they might use it. But if it adds substantially to their cost, they will not, or more accurately cannot, sacrifice profit for the sake of a few trees. What matters at the end of the day are not the manager's personal values, but the difference in price between recycled paper and the paper made from newly felled trees. There are other reasons not to rely upon the voluntary benevolence of corporate executives. As The Economist has written, the great virtue of the single bottom line is that it holds managers to account for something. The triple bottom line does not. It is not so much a license to operate as a license to obfuscate. It is possible for a company to pursue multiple bottom lines if it is closely held by a group of like-minded shareholders. That was the case at my former company, Working Assets. Globalization. Globalization means integration of the country with the world economy. It aimed at transforming the world towards great interdependence and integration. It involves creation of networks and activities transcending economic and social and geographical boundaries. It aspires to turn the world into one whole, or creating a borderless world. Globalization is a process whereby nation states and the economies are increasingly integrated into a global economy. Nair defines globalization as the cross-border expansion of trade in goods and services as well as in capital, currencies and financial instruments. It is a process of deepening economic integration, increasing economic openness and expanding economic interdependence. The process of globalization is driven by the lure of profit and the fear of competition. From a normative perspective, globalization prescribes a strategy for development through rapid integration into the world economy. It is offered as an inevitable and benign process whereby the benefits of interdependence as well as global flows of capital and trade will lead to advances in technology and economic opportunity. However, this fails to address problems associated with transnational monopolies, the disruption and dislocation of labor and other markets, and the exploitation of weak international regulations by corporations for financial gains. Meaning of globalization. The term globalization as such denotes adjustment of national economy with that of the world economy. It is conversion of a national market into international mobility or factors of production. In other words, it may be described as the integration of national economy with that of global economy. An important attribute of globalization is the increasing degree of openness, which has three dimensions, that is international trade, international investment and international finance. According to World Development Report, globalization reflects the progressive integration of the world economies, the advantages and the disadvantages of globalization. There are various advantages and disadvantages of globalization. The advantages: it promises a promise of increased productivity and higher living standards. Globalization brings in new opportunities such as access to the markets and technology transfer. These opportunities hold out the promise of increased productivity and a higher living standard. Increase in trade in goods and services. There is tremendous growth in trade and goods and services. Trade in goods and services has grown twice as fast as global GDP in the 1990s, and the share attributable to developing countries has climbed from 230 to 290%. Increased international competition in services will lead to reduction in prices and improvements in quality. This will increase the competitiveness of downstream industries. Both industrial and developmental economics will gain by opening their markets. They provide new opportunities for growth. For developing countries, trade is the primary vehicle for realizing the benefits of globalization. Imports bring additional competition and variety to domestic markets, which benefit consumers. Exports, on the other hand, they enlarge foreign markets and benefit business. Further, trade exposes domestic firms to the best practices of foreign firms and encourages greater efficiency. Trade gives firms access to improved capital inputs such as machine tools, which boosts productivity. Trade encourages the redistribution of labor and capital to more productive sectors. It has contributed to the ongoing shift of some manufacturing and services activities from industrial to developing countries, providing new opportunities for growth. Globalization of financial markets. Globalization of financial markets affects the development because finance plays an important role in economic growth and industrialization. Financial globalization affects growth in two ways. First, it increases the global supply of capital. Second, it promotes domestic financial development and hence improves allocative efficiency, creates new financial instruments, and raises the quality of banking services. Impact on poverty. The fast growth and overall development resulting from liberalization, increased flow of trade, and capital could have a major impact on poverty. It is likely to reduce the number of people living in absolute poverty. Disadvantages of globalization. The universal acceptance of the market economy and the globalization led by private enterprises tend to have some harmful effects on the economy of developing countries. These are takeovers of national firms. There are a large number of cases of takeover of national firms by foreign firms. In some cases, the domestic firms had to hand over the majority of equity to foreign partners of joint ventures due to the inability to bring in additional capital. Brings instability. Globalization sometimes brings instability and unwelcome change in the economy. It exposes workers to competition from imports which can threaten their jobs. The inflow of foreign capital into the country through globalization may undermine banks. Now, in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. Liberalization and privatization concepts share common abhorrence of governmental action in preference of market forces controlling economic activities. Non-traditional measures to impede trade are harder to quantify and access, but they are becoming more significant as traditional tariff protection and such barriers as import quotas decline. Globalization has led to replacement of traditional and indigenous products by modern products. The faster growth and overall development resulting from liberalization, increased flow of trade and capital could have a major impact on poverty. Globalization of finance markets affects development because finance plays an important role in economic growth and industrialization. Globalization is a process of reaffirmation of faith in the markets retaining the character of independence of a country.